you work in enterprise security, then I know you spend time worrying about identity. I know I do. In fact, you might be sort of looking around for video or content to help you understand how you can optimize the way identity works in your enterprise. Well, I got a great guest here today, an expert in this area. So I hope you stick around, watch our video. You'll learn a little bit about hygiene and accounts and how really we can take identity security to the next level. So stick around and watch. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to our discussion today. We are going to be focused on identity and accounts today, and I have an expert, friend of mine from here in New Jersey. He works for a company called Sphere, and he's got a cool name, Rosario Mastrogiacomo. Did I say that okay?
Perfect.
I blew it on the first shot, but at least it's close enough. So Rosario works as the vice president at Sphere in charge of strategy and solution engineering, and is one of the experts who's here to teach us all about identity and accounts and anything else that comes up. Thanks for coming.
Great to be here.
Hey, before we get into it, tell us a little bit about Sphere, and then we can get into some of the tech. You've been there a while, so you give us a little pitch on what
So
you guys
I've been at Sphere for 10 years now, or close to 10 years. And we started as a services company. Over the course of doing those services, we built scripts and utilities and tools, and before we knew it, customers were actually asking us for those reports, for those tools. They wanted to keep them, and we're like, but we're not a software company, we're a services company. And then a light bulb went off, and was like, well, maybe we should be a software company. And what we discovered is that actually we could take all of our success with services, and if we implement product, or implement it, or essentially transform it into a product, we could add what we call a multiplier. So what you could do with 10 people, we essentially can now convert that to a product and do that same work with orders of magnitude, right? Through automation, through a lot of the way that we collect the data, the way that we process that data. The things that we could do, there's just so much a human can do with an Excel sheet, right? Versus what we could do with the vast amounts of data that our algorithms, our tool can process. So we started transforming into a software company, and now that transformation is pretty much complete. Our main focus is our product Sphere Board, and our product is about discovering issues in your environment. We pioneered the term, we like to say we pioneered the term identity hygiene, and our focus is on that identity, right? Understanding that identity in your environment, understanding exactly what that identity can do, and then finding all the issues related to that, but more importantly, then getting you to that process of actually figuring out how to fix those issues, creating a workflow to reach out to those owners that we discovered to ask them, is it okay to actually resolve these issues? And then finally, we have what we call our virtual workers that automates the actual cleanup. And that's where the multiplier comes in, right? It's definitely collecting the data and doing things like ownership, but the ability to not do 5 at a time, but 2,500 at a time in terms of actually remediating the issue is the real value in the product. And ultimately, remediation is what you want to get to, right? Because that's how you reduce risk. And the only reason we do any of this is to reduce risk.
A lot of people watching right now probably came because they're interested in identity. But one of the things you've taught me is that there's this intimacy between identity and accounts. Like there's this relationship. Take me through that. That's pretty important, I think, for practitioners.
So what you said there is exactly what there is, a relationship, right? Think of a connection between an account and an identity. I think too many times people confuse the two or kind of combine the two and think that an account is an identity. For example, the B. Smith account. Well, is that really Barbara Smith? Or is that just an account, right? Barbara Smith is the identity. That is the person that uses the B. Smith account to access a system. But Barbara Smith might have access to 10 other accounts.
She could have a lot of other accounts.
Right. And we have to have an understanding of all of the accounts that Barbara Smith owns and all the accounts that she has control over, because those are all individual entry points into the environment. And if we don't understand all those entry points into the environment, then we can't overlay that layer of controls, right, to then find the violations, to understand, well, should Barbara Smith, the identity, the human, actually be able to access all the things that all the accounts that she has access to can access?
I mean, that's the impetus for the company. You guys you saw
Exactly.
the complexity that came out of that. Now, you've been talking about discovery for a long time as a company, but now I sense you guys have been using intelligent discovery as kind of a theme to maybe show how it goes to the next level. Help me understand, like, that's a very cool concept, this idea of intelligent discovery. What do you mean by that?
So it's the difference between discovery and intelligent discovery is kind of that extra step of what you do with discovered data.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of tools that collect an awful lot of data, and really collecting an awful lot of data is not hard, right? In the modern day, you write a couple of scripts, right, and you collect as much discovery data as you can. But what do you do with that data? How do you make sense of that data? You know, what do you take these massive amounts of data around accounts and what those accounts have access to? You need to make some kind of sense out of it, and that's why we call it intelligent discovery. And what we do with that massive amount of data, number one, is find ownership. Great, you discovered 1,000 accounts, and out of those 1,000 accounts, some are regular user accounts, easy. B. Smith is Barbara Smith, because I don't have a Bob Smith in the organization. What about that local account called SVC345? What about that random local Unix, Oracle, Sybase, SQL, Windows account? What about some random Windows AD account that has some randomized name that you don't know? Maybe it's important, maybe it's not, but who actually owns that account? So what we do, the first thing that we do with that massive amount of data is actually figure out a good proposed owner. Right? We look at all of that data, we analyze it, and say, you know what? We think that this account called Oracle 123 should be owned by this individual. And we use what we call methods, and there's several different methods. There's no silver bullet to ownership, right? I can't tell you, use this method and it'll get you ownership on everything and everyone, and you never have to worry. What we do is we follow these methods one after the other, to find a good proposed owner.
You're making a recommendation.
Right.
Yeah.
And then later on, we crowdsource that ownership. We reach out to that person, and if they're not the owner, they can reassign it to someone else. And what we find is that even when we don't get the right owner, we get close enough in that kind of sphere, if you will, of that ownership, where maybe it's someone in their group and they know, oh, I need to assign it to this other person. Or maybe they used to be responsible for it, but they know that someone else has taken responsibility and they could reassign it. Yeah. So ownership is key. Ownership is everything. And ownership ties back to identity. But that's just a part of intelligent discovery. Next, you have to understand, okay, I've discovered thousands, maybe millions of accounts. Well, which ones, how do I bucket these in a way that I can properly put controls on them? Like, what are my service accounts? Yeah. What are my admin accounts? What are my regular user accounts? So asset type, or what we call the account type rules engine when it comes to accounts, buckets these accounts into logical groupings that make sense to then, the most important piece is apply those controls. The things that you desire in the organization, and the resulting violations are your calls to actions. So think of all my service accounts. If it's not a service account, an account should not run a service on a server. So your controls are a non-service account should not run a service on a server. If we discover a non-service account running a service, that's a violation. Right. Fix the violation, you reduce risk.
Are the violations dictated by rules, or sort of are they generated dynamically? Or how do you come up with those?
So they are based on industry best practices.
Yeah. But that would make sense. You probably get a whole bunch just by...
Yeah, like a common one is every account has to be owned. Well, obviously, right? We need ownership on everything. Yeah. Another one is if I discover a privileged account, it must be vaulted in a vaulting solution. Well, obviously, right? We implemented the vaulting solution. If we discover a privileged account, one of two things needs to happen. It either should not be privileged or it needs to be vaulted.
Yeah, I get it.
Right? So the violation is your call to action. And generally speaking, there's industry best practice violations that, for example, with our product, we deliver, but inevitably you have your own internal policies, and you want those controls to affect or reflect your internal policies. And as a result, you have essentially calls to actions. Instead of you digging through all of these massive amounts of data and figuring out, do I have a violation, don't I have a violation, we give you specific calls to actions. Here's all the violations. Fix these, risk goes down.
Is this usually like an IT person or security person, or maybe both?
Like, usually both.
Because I would think it must be a hazard when you're doing sales, because you walk in and it could be, It could be the IT administrators, like guys doing AD and IAM, like they may be in the IT group.
Yeah, it's interesting that the person that we have the easiest time talking to is the person who has struggled with this for years.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not even talking about kind of the reaching out to the owners, sending out Excel sheets,
No,
and
I understand.
asking people, begging people to respond. Yeah. That's a whole other source of stress for people. But just collecting all this data, in knowing that you've collected everything, that you've found everything, knowing that, well, I found everything, but did I get all the entitlements? Do I have some edge case that's preventing me from accessing, this set of accounts or this set of entitlements? And then on top of that, doing all the analysis, if you think about it, it takes an infrastructure person to understand how to get to those target systems. It takes a security person to understand, well, what is okay, not okay, right? And then it takes a developer who has to understand how to properly script or write code to collect all that data. So you have to, in order to do this effectively, you essentially have to transform into a software company, because you need all those different disciplines working together to be able to accomplish what you're trying to do. So when we go into a customer that has tried to do this or has done it and is just dealing with the pain of having to maintain this, it's the easiest sell.
That's the beauty of a platform, right?
Exactly.
So back to the kind of the different motivations of groups. One thing that comes to mind is operationally, you might have some hesitation to follow something a security person. Like I'm a security guy, I might say, shut all this stuff down.
Right.
That must come up, right? Where there's a difference of opinion between the security risk and, say, operational risk or something. Right?
So what's interesting is what usually delays any kind of security program, right? Whether it's onboarding a bunch of accounts or taking care of open access and unstructured data or cleaning up Active Directory. The thing that delays those projects most is humans, not technology. Technology can find these things really, really fast. Technology can repair these things really, really fast. But there's the operational risk. The person who is willing to take the responsibility and say, yes, infrastructure person, security person, it is okay for you to do this change to my service account or to my group. I approve it. I am taking full responsibility for, and I understand the change that you want to make, and I approve it, so that when that security person, that infrastructure person makes the change, if something goes wrong, they're not taking on that operational risk. It's not fair. It's not that they want to push that responsibility to someone else. It's just not fair. If you're responsible for maintaining a server, if you're responsible for the security risk of an organization, how could you possibly know that this one random Oracle service account, if you take that service account down, if you disable it, if you try to change the password, it will take down a critical application in the organization? You simply do not know. It's not that you want to offload that responsibility. It is not, you can't take that operational risk of risking breaking the application for the sake of security or reducing security risk.
So interesting. I want to ask you about sort of your customers. I know you deal with a wide range of sizes and scopes, but in my mind I'm thinking the more complexity, probably the more value you bring. I'm thinking the bigger the company, probably the easier the sell for you guys, I'm thinking.
We actually started at the enterprise. Our very first customers, even when we were a services organization, was some of the largest banks in the world. So we started in financial, started
because they have
they
crap
just,
all over the place.
And we certainly aren't a product that you could sell to a mom and pop shop, right? An office with 50 people. Well, who's the administrator? Oh, Bob. Bob's the administrator. I don't need a tool to tell me that Bob has admin access.
That's
Bob is our
not,
server guy and our
IT
guy. Right. So definitely when we get to the mid-size, definitely it becomes more of an interesting product. 100% large, guaranteed. They have this
It seems
issue.
like it's a perfect fit for the complexity that exists in a large multinational, a big bank, a big organization, probably government too, I would think.
Government, hospitals, we get a lot of, we've been doing a lot more with media, actually. And what we found is that a lot of the issues that we saw with financial organizations, it actually, it translates well to retail and media and healthcare. They all have the same problem. It's that problem of discovery, of understanding, well, what is my full inventory of everything? That is not a problem that's just tied to
Yeah.
finance or retail or manufacturing. The reality is it's really a problem for mid to large organizations. You get to a certain size, and then it's not just Bob in the corner. We actually have a whole team of IT people, and actually it's more than just one team. There's a team here and a team in our remote offices, and understanding who's creating these accounts. Are they building servers correctly so that all these rogue accounts aren't getting created? Having that understanding is critical, and it's virtually impossible in a large, complex organization to have that one central repository of all of these things.
I remember Rita, your CEO, telling me a few years ago that the value prop that made perfect sense is that so many companies are trying to achieve, she used the term hygiene, I think that's still a term you guys use, identity hygiene, might hire 2-3 people to do it.
Yeah.
You multiply their salary by that, and usually doing it manually is not going to be as efficient as doing it with a platform. So it struck me when I first started looking at you guys that you really do pay for yourself, because you do need that before and after. You need hygiene because the compliance requirements now kind of dictate that you can't go in with a mess. You'll have findings everywhere.
Yeah, so what's interesting, we do an ROI calculator for potential customers when we talk to them, and when we present the results, they're like, this is crazy, you're insane, there's no way this costs this much money. I was like, all right, let's walk through it. The moment that you buy any product, any security product, not talking about Sphere, let's talk about any security product, there's the cost of that product, but then the real cost is from the moment you buy the product to the moment you fully deploy. And no one gets to 100%. 90, 95 is really 100%. So from that moment to that end, from that start point to that end point, that is the real cost. And that cost is humans, right? People to implement the tool, people to actually make the thing work better. So all of that is orders of magnitude more expensive than the initial cost of the software.
Yeah.
So what if I can...
I would agree with that, by the way. I think
that's the biggest cost. And you look at the typical deployment of major pieces of software, and someone is like, well, I'm 25% deployed, I'm 75% deployed. No one's ever 100%, right? Because it's a constantly changing dynamic environment. Now, when it comes to certain platforms, for example, the way that we integrate with some vaulting solutions, the ability for us to say, well, we can come in and I can now shrink that, right? Because of the automation with the virtual worker, because of the workflow through our ARM tool, I could actually show you in a POV, I can show you in a demo, how we could dramatically shrink that time to value, right? How quickly you could get to that 90%. So if I could do that, once we explain it, we're like, oh yeah. Well, I was like, think about how many people how much money you already spent.
Right.
And how much money, now calculate it forward, right? How much money are you going to spend to get you to that 80, 90%? Well, if I can now shrink that, and instead of you waiting years, I can get you there in months, then that justifies the product.
That's an ROI. That's awesome. What have I not asked you about? We've traveled through the whole product and the topics. I hope this has been useful for people watching. Anything we've forgotten to cover?
The one piece is that actual, we talked about ownership, we talked about identity, and we talked about discovery.
Right.
But the piece that's just as critical is what I call the right side of, when I talk about the product, I talk about the product kind of being split between the left side and the right side. On the left side is intelligent discovery, everything we've been talking about, finding owners, finding controls and violations, discovering all the assets, discovering all the entitlements. On the right side is actually, well, what do I do about it, right? And the first thing you have to do, so the first thing you want to do is, you found a proposed owner, but now let's get a confirmed owner. And you do that by reaching out to that person and have them reassign ownership. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take responses. You're going to ask that person, that owner, once they've said, yes, I am taking responsibility, you're going to ask them very specific questions about actually how to fix the issue that you want to fix. And then we call that ARM, that's our workflow tool, where the user's taken through a wizard where they can respond very simply, because we're reaching out sometimes to non-technical people. So we're asking them very simple questions that they understand, like we're going to the marketing person and saying, these are the 10 people that have access to your share. Tell us if those 10 people should. We're not saying accounts, we're saying people. Because, a marketing person who has their full-time responsibility doesn't have to think about, well, is there a subgroup here, and this account B. Smith, who's that? No, it's Barbara Smith. This is who Barbara Smith reports to. This is her business unit. This is her department. Oh yeah, I know Barbara Smith. She works right next door. Yes, Barbara Smith can have access. So collecting that information, again, from the business owner, and then ultimately running the virtual worker to take those responses is what closes the loop, right? That's where you have that 360 of from discovery to ultimately reducing risk. And like I always say, no one buys a security product because they like it and they like charts and graphs and they think that a security product is cool. People buy a security product to reduce risk. So our goal is to reduce risk, and we do that by doing every step.
You've been with the company for a decade, haven't you?
10 years.
Good for
September,
you.
10 years.
You know something, it's rare that we run across companies that have that startup feel, but that have a nice legacy of working with customers for a long time. I can congratulate you and the team on hell of a nice run. I think the next few years are going to be even better.
Thank you.
Well, listen, you come back and see us. I hope people watching visit the website, I would think, Sphere would, sphere.com?
Sphereco.com.
Sphereco.com. Thanks for coming by. You come
Thank
back
you.
in a little bit and share with us your progress later in the year.
Great, thank you.
Great to see you. And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.